HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Let It Bang, a young black man's reluctant odyssey into guns, by R.J. Young, read by R.J. Young. For Grandmommy. In the Odyssey, Homer wrote, "Of all the creatures that breathe and move upon the earth, nothing is bred that is weaker than man." In The Mystique of Guns, Henry Allen wrote, "Guns are right up there with race as one of the most sensitive, taboo-ridden public issues we have, and the mystique gets bigger all the time." Chapter 1. Charles and Lizzie. When I first met Charles Stafford, it was simply in passing. I was at his house on a hill, one he could afford to have fenced, because my boss at the time, Mary, had invited me there to her son's high school graduation party. Mary's son had been a lifelong friend to Charles's son. The two were graduating together and throwing a party to celebrate in a place called Coweta. Coweta is a town in Wagner County, Oklahoma. It's the kind of place where the owner of a used car lot thought he'd show his wit and charm by calling his business Shade Tree Cars and Trucks. It's the kind of town where a shade tree mechanic will pull over to find out why your car is broken down, fix the problem, and send you on your way, asking nothing more in return than a well-placed handshake. In Coweta, the word shit has 4 syllables, and you can still get popped in the mouth for saying it. It's also the kind of town where it's perfectly normal not to invite a single black person to a party. I drove from my apartment in Tulsa out into the sticks, into God's country, as I've heard it called, because Mary's secretary had instructed me that it was a big deal to be invited to one of Mary's family-related events. At the time, I was an intern for Mary at the University of Tulsa's Collins Fitness Center. To decline would not have been a good look, and could have led to a piss-poor work environment. So because I had to, I found the place, pulled up, and stepped out of my piece-of-shit Oldsmobile Alero. I stayed just long enough for my first ever encounter with Charles's daughter Lizzie. I could not avert my eyes from her. Lizzie wore a flowing lavender dress. Her hair was pulled back into a long, curly, blonde ponytail that forced me to confront the ferocity and beauty of her features. She looked at me with the kind of contempt usually reserved for someone about to smash a puppy's head in with a brick. It took me a few seconds to realize I was in her fucking seat. I moved. She smiled then and sat down. I tried to mingle among the faces that looked nothing like mine, but I couldn't handle it. I found the nearest exit and left the place, which felt foreign and uncomfortable. My story with Charles and Lizzie would have ended here if I had not egregiously failed an elective, a class called Philosophy of Art. That was the first falling domino that led me to Lizzie. As a student at the University of Tulsa, I worked as a mechanic at Pep Boys part-time and as a personal trainer when I could get clients. I ran the 60 meters, 200 meters, and 400 meters, all really fucking slowly, for the track team and was a member of the co-ed cheerleading squad. You might find it funny that the little scholarship money I did receive came from cheerleading, or as I was fond of saying, throwing white girls in the air. I'd signed up for the philosophy class to fulfill a requirement for my degree in exercise and sports science, but signing up was pretty much all I did. The loud thud of the F when it landed on my up till then pretty damn good GPA meant I was in danger of being placed on academic probation, while being still 3 hours short of the 124 hours I needed to finish my degree. And I had no money for summer school. Yes, I'd slipped when I failed philosophy of art. I was tired and not much interested in what dead white men like Immanuel Kant and Georg Hegel had to say about anything, let alone the meaning of life. And it had been only 6 months since a member of the financial aid department at TU looked me square in the eye while saying, "If you can't afford to be here, then you shouldn't be here." This after carrying loans that surely will be hanging over my head long after global warming has become global scorched earth. So I was overjoyed when Mary offered me a paying job at the fitness center through the summer. Taking the job with Mary came with one caveat. She'd asked that I consent to work as a trainer with her friend's daughter. Can I meet her first, I said. You've met her. I have? Who is she? She'll be here tomorrow. I expect you to be here too. When I showed up at work the next day, I saw Mary standing beside the woman who had told me with nothing more than a furrowed brow and a twitch of the nose that I was in her fucking seat. She was looking back at me. The toughest part of working out with someone who doesn't want to work out is finding something to talk about. But with Lizzie, there was no talking. Well, there was, but it was decidedly one-sided and repetitive. I would ask a question, and she would either roll her eyes or raise her eyebrows. Rather than attempt an exercise I asked her to try, she would just stare. This went on for a few days, until I asked her if she would rather just walk the track. In response, she simply turned and began walking up the stairs to the second level of the facility where the track was. Just being with me for an hour in a place that looked built to torture her physically and emotionally was horrible for Lizzie. She'd been overweight for most of her life and was somewhat resigned to that. I would try to empathize with her, but nobody wants to hear how the currently fit trainer was once a fat kid. Mary knew this about my background, and it was why she chose to bring Lizzie and me together. Even though it wasn't working, I continued to try to relate to Lizzie. This was our routine for about a week, because after my sessions with Lizzie, I also trained Mary, along with Lizzie's mother, Nancy. They'd asked how things were going with Lizzie, and I was fine with telling them. That is, until the day I lost my temper with Lizzie and straight to her face, called her kind of a bitch. She didn't speak to me after I said those words to her. She simply gave me the finger and walked away. I knew then that I would be fired. Except I wasn't. Mary and Nancy told me that this white girl's getting pissed off and flipping me the bird was a good thing. That I had elicited emotion from Lizzie, which was precisely what they'd hoped for when putting the black man who talked too much together with the white woman who talked little to not at all. No, they said, you're doing a good job. I've never thought two white women crazier than I did that day. The next day, Lizzie showed up, which was cause enough for celebration. But then she said something. It's that you don't read, she said. What? She did that furrowed brow, nose-twitching thing again. I don't expect someone like you to read. Someone like me? She gestured at my muscle shirt and shorts. Ah, I see, I said. So you'd be surprised if I said I like Shakespeare. She rolled her eyes. No, you don't. My words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts, never to heaven go. Do it again, she said. That was the first time I saw her winged smile. The one that quivers and disappears all at once, like the wings of a hummingbird. This is how the formal courtship began, with talking. We talked throughout all of our sessions after that one. But soon, that hour proved to be insufficient. We talked through text messages, about books, about politics, about each other. Lizzie became the person I wanted to speak with each morning and the person I wanted to speak with before bed that night. She was my best friend, and I was grateful to be hers. And then she'd smile at me, and I no longer wanted to be just her friend. I wanted to be her most intimate friend, too. Her husband. I loved her. I never expected that to change, and it hasn't. I eventually asked Lizzie to marry me, and she said yes. Because I loved Lizzie, I felt compelled to try to know her family. But by the first time Lizzie took me home to meet her parents, 3 months after we began dating, I knew just one thing about Charles, her father. The only thing he and I had in common was a mutual admiration for Lizzie. Charles shook my hand the first time we formally met. Then he promptly left the room. Neither Lizzie nor Nancy found it alarming that he came back in with the biggest goddamn revolver I'd ever seen. They didn't think it was weird that he would hand it to me either. I felt certain that I had landed in either Wes Craven's rendition of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner or the next film in the Saw franchise. I knew that in a horror movie, the black man usually dies first. I was waiting for one of the 3 white people in the room to tell me how most people are so ungrateful to be alive, or how they would have voted for Obama a 3rd time, right before performing a lobotomy on me in the family den. Charles pointed to the gun in my hand. "It's a judge." I didn't know what that meant, and I don't think he knew what it meant to hand me, a young black man, a revolver that Dirty Harry would be scared of. Once the feeling of fright dimmed, the absurdity of this event hit me. To show me what a down brother he was, the man wanted me to hold a pistol he could cross-load with 45 long Colt and 410 shotgun shells. As I got to know him, I would come to see this gesture as one of the Charlesest things ever. It was truly a display of friendship, but that day, all I took in was how important firearms were to the man whose daughter I was dating. It was also my first clue as to how hard it was going to be to fit into his family. After Charles placed that cartoonish revolver in my hands, I made several other forays into the wilderness of Lizzie's family. The first came a year into our relationship when she brought me, her boyfriend, home for Thanksgiving. Nancy was smart enough to assume that her daughter and I might be sleeping in the same bed, which I would neither confirm nor deny. She told Lizzie it would be perfectly fine with both her and Charles if we chose to sleep in Lizzie's bed, 2 feet from her parents' bedroom. Pass. I think Nancy knew I would say no because she'd already turned down the bed in the guest room for me, and that's where I slept that night. The next day I woke and drove to the gym in town for a lift and a run. I came back to the house to find a set of roundhouse overalls, gray long johns, white socks, brown gloves, and a heavy brown Carhartt jacket with a pair of work boots on the floor. I turned to look at Lizzie. "I hope they fit," she said. I checked the tags and the size of the boots. They did. But what do I need them for? At this, Lizzie merely smiled and handed me a wool cap. "He's waiting on you." Waiting on, Charles burst into the room. "Come on, RJ. Get changed. We got work to do." Before I had the chance to ask what I was getting changed for, Lizzie and Charles left the room and closed the door. This left me with no option except to put on the clothes. Then I walked outside, and the biting wind hit me head on, making a cold day colder than ice cubes know Vaseline. Lizzie's younger brother, Jimmy, who would be my future brother-in-law, and Charles were waiting for me. They told me it was time to get in the truck. I could see my breath, and yet my hands were beginning to sweat inside the gloves. What on earth was I doing with these white men? Charles drove up to the gate that separated the 5 acres his house was built on from the rest of his property. Jimmy stepped out of the truck and unlocked the padlock on the large green metal gate. He swung it wide, and Charles drove through. After Jimmy closed the gate, we drove up and over a hill. On the descent, I could make out what looked like a small orange metal corral connected to a blue metal chute. As we drove closer, another truck pulled up, and out popped 2 more men. The 3 of us stepped out of our truck, and I was introduced to Charles's brother-in-law, Jay, and his son, Mikey, who lived on the hill just across the pasture. Through this introduction and the following conversation, I came to understand just what the hell we were doing out on a biting cold, gray November day when even the sun knew better than to come out and play. We were going to vaccinate cows. But to vaccinate cows, you need cows. And to get the cows, you need to round them up. So Mikey and Charles each jumped back into a truck and began herding cattle toward the corral. Soon, those animals were milling about in the pen, sounding terrified. I was just standing there, feeling like an idiot. Jimmy held out 2 long black sticks, indicating I was supposed to pick one up. I noticed their ends looked different. I casually took one from his hands. "What's this?" "It's a bullwhip." "What do you have?" He hit a button at the top of the stick's grip, and a fierce wave of lightning flashed. "An electric cattle prod?" Jimmy's face took on an "ain't it cool" expression, and I started to do the only thing I could think of: use my phone to record what was happening. Outside my comfort zone, all but paralyzed by the absurdity of watching cows with horns being crammed into the pen. Of thinking how the smell of a newly pinched cow turd punishes your nose for simply performing its natural function, while Charles showed how impressed he was with the size of a heifer's stool. Boy, they're shitting good. He said it with ferocious pride, like a newborn's father cooing through the glass at the hospital nursery. Of course, this is Charles's livelihood. This is how he feeds his family. To him, cattle are an important commodity. But for me, this was all new. I was trying to survive this initiation into Lizzie's family. Mikey ushered each cow individually into the blue chute and into a neck brace. Then Charles and Jay took turns sticking a cow in the neck with a needle filled with a one-stop-shop vaccination. The process looked barbaric to me, but I eventually became sort of enchanted, watching those cows and calves taking offense at being manhandled. I was happy as a voyeur, but that role was not to last. One large cow balked at entering the chute, and I was handed the electric cattle prod. Juice him, RJ, which was Charles trying to help me do something useful, rather than fiddling with my phone and playing dress-up. Despite my reservations, I poked the cow. I was frightened to see it rear up on its hind legs and get pissed. Then I realized it wasn't a cow at all. It was a bull. I still don't know how my shorts remained unsoiled. After about 3 hours, more than 120 cows had been penned, slammed down the chute, and boosted with vaccinations. Mikey celebrated with a soda and inadvertently spilled a bit on Jay's truck. I'm sorry, I said. I was only vaguely aware that I didn't owe Mikey an apology for the fact that he'd spilled his own damn soda. I was basically past logical thought processes by then. Forget it, Mikey said. It's a Toyota anyway. Chapter 2. We're all mad here. Before I'd begun to court Charles's firstborn, I had little desire to know about guns because I believed I knew enough about them already. Which is to say, I knew that a gun, especially in the hands of a complete stranger with a badge and a mandate to protect and serve, could get me killed. For the first 12 years of my life, my family lived in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and Panama City, Florida, cities in the South where firearms are plentiful. Yet we didn't have anything to do with guns. Although my father did look forward to watching new episodes, and in some cases, reruns of the reality TV show Cops, he'd even sit through commercials rather than risk missing anything. Cops is police procedural porn that frequently focuses on poor people in poor neighborhoods. That's exactly the focus that the audience wants. In 2011, Cops became the longest-running show in the history of the Fox Broadcasting Company. At the time, its only real competition for that honor was America's Most Wanted, another show focusing on the worst of us, fugitives from the law who have committed serious and heinous crimes. But my father's impulse to watch Cops wasn't based on the desire to watch as the dregs of society get their comeuppance. It was something else. We need to know what they're doing now, he'd say. By they, my father meant beat cops in blue, driving around in a squad car, locked, loaded, and looking for action. As municipal police in different parts of the country discussed what they were expecting might occur, a cameraman, who I hope received some sort of hazard pay, rode along and shot the action as the cops chased the suspect, apprehended that suspect, and placed him under arrest. My father took lessons from this show, and he'd share them with me. There's very little difference between a cop and a psycho when they've got a gun. Both of them want to pull their gun on you. So don't let them search your car. They'll plant things there and say it was there the whole time. The law is on their side, all the time. You're at the mercy of a psycho who is permanently on the side of the law. That's scary, son. You're right to be scared. And Cops teaches you that. My father said this frequently. He meant that, as a black man, it was incumbent upon me to know and understand the tactics police use to corner, intimidate, and incriminate black men. When I was 14, 1 in 6 black men in my country had ended up in prison. A year later, while standing on the sidewalk outside the Springdale Shopping Center in North Tulsa, a white cop bombarded me with questions about why I was there. I could see he wasn't sure if I was telling the truth about shopping at a clothing store called Tops and Bottoms. But then he noticed the Academy-style Eagle Scout ring on my finger. He smiled. "That ring just saved you a trip to the pokey, son." This was not the first time I'd been interrogated on the street about who I was and what I was doing at a certain place. That this cop could see a pudgy 5'5" black kid with a peach fuzz mustache as a threat, as an adult, frightened me then, and it frightens me now. That we live in a nation where blacks, who make up just 13% of the U.S. population, make up nearly 40 goddamn percent of the prison population is fairly common knowledge. But to me, every day was and is a struggle not to become one of these statistics. Every day, I am afraid of it. These are facts my parents knew. They sought to prepare me, in the best way they could, to live in a country full of people who think less of me, or think I might do them harm, because my skin is brown and my hair is dark and curly. I believed that my wielding of a gun would only serve to give these people more reason to act on what they already believed. So I made a point to avoid guns whenever I could, wherever I could. It took some time for me to get used to seeing a shotgun leaning against the side door every time I walked into Charles's house. Cold and black, the gun stood watch in case of intruders. I took note of the alarm system keypad just across the room and contemplated the security overkill. But the side door shotgun was not the only gun Charles kept in plain view. It was not uncommon to find a pistol or revolver lying on the kitchen table, along with a half-empty box of shells. Lizzie told me this was normal in Charles's house, and not meant to intimidate or scare me. But it did scare me. Charles owned small handguns, large handguns, handguns with cylinders like those that 19th century U.S. Marshals used, handguns like the ones modern police use. Charles didn't come to own assault rifles until he was in his 60s. But handguns? Charles has owned handguns for most of his life. On one occasion, I asked about his self-defense sidearm, a gun I'd seen him stick in a bag like an oversized wallet that he carried. "Why do you carry that gun?" I asked. "And why do you have so many?" Charles, sitting in his favorite recliner, took a deep breath and said something about needing to go down to the record shop. He made for the door, only briefly slowing down to pick up his jacket and hat, and left me alone in the living room. A few minutes later, Lizzie emerged from her bedroom. "Where'd he go?" she asked. "He said he was going to the record shop, but I think I made him mad." "What? How?" "I just asked him why so many guns." "Oh, baby." She took on a defeated look and then sat down across from me. That was when I learned from Lizzie that you don't comment on how many guns a person has. You don't ask how many guns they've bought. You don't ask how many guns they've sold. It's like asking how much money you make or how many times a week you have sex with your wife, Lizzie said. You just don't do it. Charles interpreted my question the way a corner boy might, though he stopped short of giving me side-eye and asking, "Nigga, is you wearing a wire?" My parents taught me there is no such thing as a stupid question, but clearly they were wrong. I felt embarrassed about the whole thing. I wasn't keen on learning about guns in the first place, and now I'd been made to feel like a fool for what I didn't know. Fuck it. This old man was not proving to be worth the effort, and I was tired of pushing, so I stopped, until he gave me reason not to. Soon after vaccination Thanksgiving, despite my best efforts and mechanical know-how, my Alero finally decided to depart this weary world. It died in its sleep. I had parked it outside the apartment that Lizzie and I now pretty much shared, and the car refused to even cough a start the next morning. I checked the battery, I tested the spark plugs, and I tested the alternator. And when those things failed, I went to the obvious. Did the car have gas? Was I using the correct key? Was I even in the right car? After more than a day of tinkering and phone calls to auto tech friends much smarter than me, I gave up. The car was dead, and I needed to start walking. When I arrived home that night, Lizzie met me at the door and held out a key she'd made. It was for her Impala. "We can share," she said. This was no small gift in a state where public transportation is for shit, and it is nearly impossible to get from one place to another without 4 wheels and a driver's license. Lizzie and I shared her car for several months, and that's when it became clear to me that though she held down a job that covered her rent, her parents were paying for her degree in English literature, as well as her car. I was unaccustomed to such acts of generosity. I'd never personally met anyone with the means and will to perform them. The weight of this discovery was jarring. The schism in my own family had begun purely because of finances, but religion and politics had strained things even further and made a relationship with my parents untenable. But I still needed family. Now that I was sharing Lizzie's car, the last thing I wanted her father to think was that I might be using her. On the next trip to Coweta, I waited until I could get Charles alone. It was 2 days before I caught him by himself at the kitchen table, reading the paper. I took a seat next to him, and then a deep breath. "Charles?" He took his time, as if finishing a paragraph, laid the paper down, and peered at me over the top of his glasses. "RJ? I realize you do a lot for Lizzie, but I want you to know that what you do for her is not what you do for me. I've made my own way, and I plan to continue doing that as long as Lizzie keeps me around." Charles studied me for just a moment with a quizzical expression. "Does this mean you're not going to let me buy you a car?" See that? Just when I thought the old bastard was going to make it easy for me to continue to see him as a flat character in the rolling sitcom that is my life, he rounded out into the kind of person he'd raised his daughter to be, capable of great kindness and generosity. I didn't ask why. I just fought back tears and hugged him. Charles bought me my first truck that same weekend. I resolved then to begin my quest to get to know Charles through what he liked best. I'd exhaust all avenues at my disposal until I felt comfortable enough to engage him on the topic of guns. This time, I planned to do it right. I would avoid putting my foot in my mouth and keep quiet until I knew what questions to ask and in what manner to ask them. I came close to derailment at Christmas. We opened our presents in Charles's house. He pretended to be a fat white man in a red suit with a deer fetish, living in sub-zero temperatures most of the year, who had brought trinkets to each of us. But my eyes kept drifting back to the weapon of war on the floor next to Charles. For Christmas, he had bought himself a Smith & Wesson AR-15 derivative. I didn't ask how he could just walk into Atwood's, the local farm and ranch supply chain store, buy the thing off the shelf like a loaf of bread, and own it without fear. I kept that to myself, but just being in the same room with it felt crazy. This was Christmas. It was the day of good cheer, bad music, and ugly sweaters, of whimsy, of family, of fun. But I had none until Charles finally took this rifle, which had been banned by law throughout most of my life, back to his bedroom. I kept that to myself too. But that Christmas, I wondered how my country had gotten to be so over-the-top demanding about the right to bear arms, the biggest, baddest arms we can get our hands on. Why do so many adults I know, not just in Coweta, but across Oklahoma and the entire country, think they need a gun? Our nation has...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?